I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. My marriage with Jake had always been something I was proud of. We'd been together for years, built a life together, and I genuinely thought we were happy. But lately, something felt off. The small things that used to keep us connected, like texting throughout the day or laughing at inside jokes, had slowly faded away. I couldn't exactly pinpoint when it started, but I could feel the shift, like the distance between us was growing, even when we were in the same room. Jake wasn't a bad husband. He was thoughtful, caring, and responsible. He worked hard to provide for us, and I never doubted his love for me. But sometimes I couldn't help but feel like something was missing. The excitement, the passion, the spark that had once made our relationship feel electric, it was all fading. We had fallen into a routine, and somehow it had started to feel more like a habit than something that was exciting or new. I couldn't remember the last time we'd done something spontaneous or really connected on a deeper level. I was busy too. My job was demanding, and I often felt like I was juggling a million things at once. It felt like there was always something to do: housework, bills, errands. And when I wasn't working, I was trying to keep up with my friendships. One friendship in particular started to take on more significance. Mia and I had been friends for years, but recently I found myself thinking about her more than I should. We'd met in college, and from the start we clicked. She was different from anyone else I knew: funny, spontaneous, and always up for a new adventure. We had always been close, but lately there was a shift in how I felt about her. It started off small little moments where I realized I was thinking about her outside of the usual hangouts. I found myself excited to see her, counting down the days until we could hang out again. I liked the way she made me laugh, the way she seemed to understand me without me having to explain myself. When I was with her, it felt like I could just be myself, without the pressures of life weighing me down. It wasn't that I wasn't happy with Jake, but with Mia I felt seen. It was like I could breathe easier when she was around. I tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to being in a rut in my marriage. It wasn't like I was planning anything or crossing any boundaries, but there was a quiet pull inside me, like something was stirring that I couldn't fully control. And that was when the idea of going to the spa together came up. Mia suggested it one afternoon, and I agreed, thinking it would just be a nice, relaxing escape. We'd done things like this before: spent the day at the spa, talked about life, vented about work, and just relaxed in the sauna. But this time there was something different about it. Maybe it was the way Mia looked at me that day, or how the tension between us seemed to shift when we were in the steam-filled room. I don't know what exactly changed, but as soon as we stepped into the sauna, I felt an electricity in the air that wasn't there before. The heat in the room pressed down on me, making everything feel more intense, more alive. For a moment, I forgot about everything else. I forgot about the distance I felt with Jake, about the confusion that had been clouding my mind. All I could focus on was the warmth of the sauna and the proximity between Mia and me. It felt easy to be in that space with her, easy to just be. But I had no idea that this moment would change everything. The spa day was supposed to be a way to unwind, to forget about everything else for a few hours. I needed a break from the monotony of life, the work, the bills, the constant obligations that always seemed to hang over my head. Mia suggested it, and I thought it was a great idea. A day of relaxation, maybe a little pampering, and some much-needed time to just be. But when we arrived, it quickly became clear that today wouldn't be as simple as I'd imagined. We spent the first few hours enjoying the usual massages, facials, and lounging by the pool. It was easy to slip into that comfortable rhythm of being around Mia. She was always the carefree one, the one who made everything feel lighthearted and fun. But there was an undercurrent of tension between us that I couldn't shake. The more time we spent together, the more I felt this strange, magnetic pull that I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd been so focused on the emptiness I felt in my marriage that I hadn't realized how much I was depending on Mia for a sense of excitement, for something to fill that void. The sauna was the final stop on our day, and as soon as we walked in, I felt the difference. The heat hit us like a wave, making everything feel slower, more intense. We found an empty spot and sat down in silence, the heat making everything around us feel hazy, like we were in a dream. I could feel the sweat starting to bead on my skin, the air thick with steam, and for the first time that day I could feel myself relaxing. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. In that quiet space, it felt like everything else faded away. Mia and I sat there, the silence between us strangely comfortable. We had shared these moments before, but today it felt different. The air felt charged in a way I couldn't explain. I couldn't stop thinking about how close we were, how her presence seemed to fill the space around me. I noticed little things, how her skin glistened with the steam, how her eyes kept glancing at me, how her breath was just a little deeper than usual. It was like I could feel the change in the air, too. Something unspoken lingered between us, and every second that passed made it more impossible to ignore. I tried to focus on the heat to distract myself, but it was like my body had other ideas. I couldn't stop looking at her. Mia had always been beautiful, but today she seemed different. Maybe it was the way the steam softened her features or how the quiet made her seem even more captivating. I could feel my heart beating faster, and my thoughts were racing. I couldn't tell if I was imagining things or if she felt it too, the unspoken tension that seemed to rise with every passing second. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out. My hand brushed against hers, just a fleeting touch, but it felt electric. Mia didn't pull away. Instead, she met my gaze, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity I hadn't expected. I felt a jolt of heat flood through me, not from the sauna, but from the way she looked at me. It wasn't just friendly. It wasn't just the warmth of the steam. It was something else, something more. We sat there, both of us silent, but everything felt so loud in that moment. I could feel my breath shallow, my heart hammering in my chest. The pull between us was undeniable, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in. I could feel her tense for just a moment before she closed the space between us, and then we were kissing. It wasn't planned, it wasn't something I had thought about. But the moment it happened, I felt like it was the only thing that mattered. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, as if we were both trying to figure out if it was real, if it was okay, but it quickly deepened, and in that moment, everything else, the confusion about my marriage, the guilt I hadn't yet realized I'd feel, disappeared. It felt like we were the only two people in the world, and everything outside that sauna didn't matter. I don't even remember exactly how it all happened. One moment we were sitting in the sauna, two friends caught in the quiet, the steam surrounding us, and the next it felt like the world had tilted. The moment our lips met, everything shifted. It was sudden, like a floodgate opening, and there was no turning back. The kiss wasn't planned, it wasn't something either of us had intended. But it felt inevitable, like all of the quiet tension between us had been building up to this point. The way she looked at me, the way the air between us seemed to hum with unspoken desire, it was too much to ignore anymore. For a brief moment, I thought about pulling away. I thought about Jake, about the life I'd built with him. I thought about what this would mean for our relationship, for the trust we had between us. But in that moment, all of that faded into the background. All I could focus on was the feeling of Mia's lips against mine, the softness, the heat. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. For the first time in so long, I felt seen in a way that I hadn't felt with Jake in months. It wasn't that I didn't love him, I did. But this felt different. It felt like I was awake, like something inside me that had been dormant for so long was finally alive. I couldn't pull away, and Mia didn't either. She didn't seem to hesitate, and that made everything feel even more intense. We were both caught up in the moment, swept away by something that neither of us had expected, but both of us had probably been waiting for. I could feel her hands on my arms, pulling me closer, and I responded without thinking. My body seemed to know what it wanted long before my mind could catch up. The kiss deepened, and I could taste the heat of the sauna on her skin, could feel the sweat sliding down our necks, but none of that mattered. Nothing mattered except the connection we shared in that space. It wasn't just a physical reaction, it was emotional too. Every part of me, every part of her seemed to sync up in a way I couldn't explain. The world outside the sauna, the life I had with Jake, all of the promises I had made, they felt so far away. All that mattered in that moment was Mia and me, and the way we seemed to fit together so naturally, as if we'd been doing this forever. It was exhilarating, overwhelming, and terrifying all at once. I couldn't believe it was happening, but I couldn't stop it either. When we finally pulled away, we both sat there in the heavy silence, the steam thick around us. It was as if the world had frozen for a second, and then time came rushing back. The reality of what had just happened hit me, but it didn't feel real. I didn't feel guilty, not yet at least. I was still high on the rush of the kiss, still trying to process what it meant. What did it mean? What was I supposed to do now? Mia's eyes met mine, and I could see the same confusion reflected there. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us could find the words to make sense of what had just happened. We sat there in silence, both of us caught in our own heads, trying to understand what had just changed between us. I could feel the weight of it settling in, but at the same time I didn't want to acknowledge it. The moment had been too perfect, too intense, to let the reality of the situation spoil it. But deep down I knew it wasn't just a kiss. It was a line crossed, and there was no going back. The guilt hit me like a wave, and it didn't stop. At first I tried to convince myself that it wasn't as bad as it seemed, that it was just a moment of weakness, that the connection with Mia was something I could brush off. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it gnawed at me. That kiss, that moment in the sauna, it wasn't just a slip-up. It was a betrayal. And the weight of it hung around me like a shadow that wouldn't leave. I went home to Jake that night, and I did my best to act normal. I hugged him, kissed him, told him about my day at the spa, but inside I was falling apart. I was so scared of what would happen if he found out. I kept thinking, how did I let it get to this point? I had crossed a line that, before today, I never even thought I would approach. The guilt was suffocating, and I couldn't escape it. Every time I looked at Jake, I felt like a stranger. It wasn't just that I had kissed someone else, it was that I had been so caught up in this moment with Mia that I had completely lost sight of everything else. I had betrayed Jake's trust, and in the process, I had betrayed myself. The days that followed were a blur. Every time I thought about what had happened, I felt sick. I couldn't stop thinking about Mia, about that kiss, about the way we had connected in a way that I hadn't connected with Jake in so long. The guilt was overwhelming, but at the same time, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward Mia. I didn't know what it meant or what I was supposed to do with it, but I couldn't just pretend like nothing had changed. I couldn't stop thinking about her. I found myself checking my phone for messages, even though I knew I should avoid her. I told myself I wouldn't contact her, that I needed space, but then I'd find myself thinking of an excuse to reach out. Every time I did, I felt like I was betraying Jake all over again. Jake, on the other hand, seemed oblivious. He had no idea what was going on inside me, and part of me wanted to keep it that way. I didn't want to hurt him. He didn't deserve this, but how could I face him knowing what I had done? How could I look him in the eye and pretend everything was fine when I knew I had shattered the trust between us? I avoided Mia for a while too. After that kiss, everything felt more complicated. I didn't know how to act around her. I didn't know what we were anymore. Our friendship had been simple before, but now it was tangled in something much messier. I couldn't talk to her about how I was feeling without risking everything. It felt like the weight of my actions was crushing me, and I didn't know how to bear it. Every day I found myself questioning what I had done. I questioned why I had let it happen, why I hadn't stopped it before it went too far. I had every reason to pull away, to step back and protect my marriage, but I didn't. I couldn't. And that realization was the hardest part. I wasn't just feeling guilty because I had cheated on Jake, I was feeling guilty because, in a way, I didn't want to stop. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I was afraid of what would happen if I tried to walk away from it. I had no idea how to fix this, or if it could even be fixed. What was I supposed to do now? What was I supposed to feel? The guilt was suffocating, but it wasn't the only thing I felt. I was confused, conflicted, and terrified of what would happen if the truth came out. And yet, somehow, I knew I couldn't keep running from it. The longer I ignored it, the worse it would get. Eventually, I reached a point where I knew I couldn't keep living this lie. The guilt had become unbearable, and every time I looked at Jake, I felt like I was suffocating. The weight of what I'd done was crushing me, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. I couldn't keep pretending like nothing had happened. I had betrayed him, and I needed to face the consequences of my actions. But even though I knew deep down that I had to tell him, I couldn't bring myself to do it. How do you look someone in the eyes and tell them you've cheated on them? How do you explain that you've been unfaithful to the person you promised to love and cherish? The thought of losing everything terrified me, but I couldn't escape the reality of what I had done. I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and there was no way to erase the memory of that kiss, of everything that had happened with Mia. I avoided talking to Mia too. It wasn't because I didn't want to see her. I was terrified of what I might say to her, or what might happen if we saw each other again. I was afraid that seeing her would only make everything worse. It was like the guilt and confusion had me trapped in a constant state of anxiety, unable to move forward or find any peace. The more I tried to run from it, the more I realized I couldn't escape. It was haunting me, and I knew I had to confront it head-on. One night, Jake and I were sitting on the couch together, watching TV, but it felt like we were worlds apart. He was there physically, but I could barely concentrate on what was happening on the screen. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, all focused on one thing: how could I tell him? How could I admit that I had been unfaithful, that I had betrayed him in the worst way possible? I couldn't keep pretending, and I couldn't live with the guilt any longer. I took a deep breath, turned to him, and opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to say it, I wanted to tell him everything, but the fear of losing him, of destroying everything we had, was overwhelming. I'd been thinking. I finally managed to say, my voice shaking, "There's something I need to tell you." Jake looked at me, concern in his eyes, but he didn't say anything. I could see the confusion on his face as he waited for me to continue. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I was on the edge of something irreversible. I made a mistake, I whispered, barely able to get the words out. I don't know how to say this, but I need to be honest with you. He leaned in, his face full of concern, but I could see a flicker of fear in his eyes, like he knew something was wrong but couldn't quite grasp what it was. "What's going on?" he asked softly. I hesitated, but I knew there was no turning back now. I took a deep breath and said the words I never thought I'd say. "I cheated on you," I whispered, the weight of the confession almost too much to bear. "With Mia. In the sauna. And I don't know what to do about it. I don't know how to fix this." Jake's face went pale, and for a moment I didn't know what to expect. His silence was deafening, and I couldn't read the expression on his face. I had no idea what he was thinking, but I knew that the moment I spoke those words, everything between us had changed forever. I waited for him to say something, to yell at me, to cry, to do anything. But he didn't. He just sat there staring at me in stunned silence. And in that silence, I realized that I had just shattered everything we had. And I wasn't sure if it could ever be fixed.